Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
From WXXI News, I'm Jasmine Singer, and this is Environmental Connections. Today's Environmental Connection was made on April 22nd, 2009. That was the day that scientists confirmed that chytridiomyosis, a deadly fungal disease, had driven the Panamanian golden frog to extinction in the wild. It was a stark reminder that amphibians already facing mounting environmental threats are on the front lines of global biodiversity loss. But here's the thing. Frogs aren't just a vanishing species in remote rainforests. They're disappearing right here in Rochester, too. Habitat loss, climate change, pollution, and disease are all driving amphibian populations into decline. And when frogs disappear, entire ecosystems suffer. So today, we're focusing on an effort to turn the tide, the restoration of vernal ponds in Pittsford, a conservation project that is giving frogs a fighting chance. How do these small temporary wetlands help sustain amphibian populations? And what role do frogs play in maintaining ecological balance? And what can local communities do to help? Joining me today are three guests deeply involved in amphibian conservation. In the studio, we have Dr. Jacques Robert, professor in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the University of Rochester Medical Center, Dr. Margot Fass, activist, artist, and founder of A Frog House, which we're going to talk a lot about today, and Bob Corby, former mayor of Pittsford and advocate for the Robert C. Corby Arboretum and Wildlife Sanctuary. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you.
We're super excited to talk about frogs. Let's start with the big picture. And Dr. Robert, amphibians have been on Earth for hundreds of millions of years, and yet today we're seeing their populations decline at what I would say is a pretty alarming rate. Why? Why is this happening, both globally and here in New York?
Well, first of all, it's about 20 years that they are declining. And compared to other groups that we estimate like 40% of all amphibian species have globally either decreased or became extinct. There's about 200 species that have been extinct. And obviously, there's habitat loss, climate change, pollution, but also invasive species like either from mammals or birds, but also even frogs, like the one I work in, Xenopus, that is an African frogs that was used for pets and that are released in natures, like for example, in California and in Washington State. There's huge population that eat everything. And it's almost impossible to rid of those species. The infection, of course, chytrids, fungus are a major culprits, and virus also infection. Why recently? I mean, for chytrid, we know it's originated in Asia, and it just find really easy to grow on many different frogs. So. And virus, for a long time, this virus is known, it's called the ranavirus, was not a major infectious. It just became more and more prevalent. And I think maybe because of stress and pollution, adding to that, we have more infection that kill animals.
Well, frogs in particular seem to be highly vulnerable to environmental changes. Mm-hmm. What is it about their biology that makes them so susceptible to habitat loss and pollution?
Well, first, compared to mammals, frogs, the eggs is developing outside of the mother. So it's very rapidly in contact in water with pathogens directly, and of course pollutants that act on the development, but also on the immune system. And that's what I'm studying. And a very low level of pollutants below EPA have already effect on the immune system and decrease the resistance of those animals to infection.
So would you say that there are any promising breakthroughs in disease prevention?
Again, it's very difficult. I think I'm working, we are at the level where endangered species are conserved in zoo, for example, where we do reproduction at high level and then put those animals back in nature. Problem with chytrid is that the resistance is not coming up, and they are again infected and died. So we are moving even to what we call synthetic biology, where we're thinking about even to change the genetic of those animals to make them more resistant. It's a very contested area, but we arrived to a verge where there's so many species disappearing that people want to act on it. And there's an effect directly on not only on frogs but on human. There's a report in South America where there's a correlation between disappearance of frogs and increase of mosquitoes and malaria. So there's a direct correlation with when you have less predators for a wide level of insects that disappear.
All right. Well, I have a lot more questions for you, but I want to turn to Dr. Fass. Dr. Fass, building on that, frogs are often called an indicator species. What does that mean? And aside from the obvious tragedy of any life form disappearing, why should we care so much about their presence or absence in local ecosystems?
Well, in one sentence, I can say if we save the frogs, we save human life. They are, as you say, indicator species, so what is happening to them is happening really to all amphibians and wildlife, reptiles, and other animals. And you mentioned all of the causes of climate change and habitat destruction, disease, and so forth. Human beings are the most prevalent animal on Earth, and we're the most destructive. So we don't know that we're digging our own graves by draining wetlands and by really killing frogs. I would like to add, because you opened with the golden Panamanian frog, it was that article by Elizabeth Colbert in the New Yorker back in April of, I think, 2019 that got me interested in the sixth extinction and frogs. I was already in my 70s, and I hadn't thought much about frogs, but I had started painting them. And then I read that article, and as you said, they've lasted so long and have been, they were before the dinosaurs, they outlived the dinosaurs, all kinds of climate catastrophes. And now we are busy just raping and killing. That's the only expression that comes to my mind. But it's our life is at stake. And as I said on one program, that they'll probably outlive us. And so my daughter asked, well, why should we save them then? Well, because we want to save ourselves.
Well, I mean, and then, of course, there's saving them to save them, too.
Because they're so cute and beautiful and
also
such variety and diversity and so clever. And I wanted to add to what Dr. Robert said, that they breathe through their skin, which is another reason that if there are pollutants in the water, they are especially affected.
I was saying your name painfully American, wasn't I, when I said Dr. Robert? Dr. Robert, would that be more?
That's okay.
Okay. Dr. Robert, could the study of amphibian immune systems lead to insights that might help us combat infectious diseases in other species?
Yes, of course. I mean, first, the skin of amphibians, because they breathe directly through skin, are really well protected by what we call antimicrobial peptides. And some of those are very potent. For example, from Xenopus, the African fruit, one substance called xenopin can kill, basically virtually all bacteria at our level. So it has not been commercially done so far because it's a complicated molecules. But there's hundreds of other molecules in different amphibian species. So that's one way. The other way is all the understanding of how the immune system develop, and that's what I'm working. I mean, it's using as a model for human health, and we learn a lot because again, compared to a fetus in a mother that is protected, although we know that more and more there's contaminant going in the placenta. the tadpoles develop, it's match the fetal development in human, and we can access the immune system and study how it develops and how it is affected by environments.
Well, thank you for that. There's a lot to learn here, but we're certainly all on the same page about the fact that we want to save them. And Bob, I want to turn to you. You've been instrumental in Pittsford's Vernal Ponds project. What initially led the community to take on this initiative? And was there a particular moment or realization that spurred action?
Well, the Vernal Ponds is part of a larger project to conserve 35 acres of open space, wild open space in the northwest corner of the village. And that started in part to give people access to passive open space. And during COVID, we really learned how important that is for people's mental and physical health. To develop this area in a way that would be cost-effective to taxpayers, but also help with a sustainable message in public education, we developed the Arboretum Project, which has an educational mission to teach the public about the importance of managing invasive species and cultivating native ecosystems, and both in terms of plants, keystone pollinators, trees, and wildlife. And the vernal pond fits perfectly because frogs are such an important part of the native food chain here in Western New York.
Actually, you know what? Let's back up. For listeners who may not be familiar, what exactly are vernal ponds? Why are they so crucial to amphibian survival?
Vernal ponds are temporary ponds that happen each year in the spring. They're filled with water, usually after the snow melt, to sometime by June they pretty much have dried up. And they provide a breeding ground for certain species of frogs as well as salamanders. And in our native forests that were pocked with what they call hummocky terrain where the big trees turned over, they were naturally full of these vernal ponds. And when we cut those forests and turned it into farmland, even when they grew back, we've lost the natural cavities that would cause vernal ponds. And so that's just one of the things that we've done inadvertently, is removing this important feature of our native landscape.
Dr. Fass, let's turn to you. You're the founder of A Frog House, which is a unique organization dedicated to amphibian conservation and education. What inspired you to create this initiative? And tell us a little bit more about the kind of work you do to engage the community.
Well, as I said earlier, it was this golden Panamanian frog, and then I discovered the organization called Save the Frogs, and that's a global international organization. And so I was sort of on the sidelines watching what they were doing. I went to a couple of eco tours in Costa Rica and Ecuador with them. And I'd started writing blogs about the frogs and, as I said, painting images. And then our daughter moved to Pittsford, and she had this property. And although she was at the time renting it, she now owns it. It was all chemicalized and invasive plants growing everywhere, and it just wasn't nice. And there's a little outbuilding about 10 feet by 10 feet that must have been used as a boathouse or something, and the former owner had used it as a library. So after doing the gardens for the summer, we came to the house, and it needed a lot of repair, plastering and new wood and a floor. So we did that, and I said, well, I have a lot of frogabilia that people have given me. And this would be a perfect place to put it. And my designer, Catherine Dennison, who designed the book called Froggy Family's First Frolic that I wrote and illustrated, said, well, why don't you open it as an educational place? So now our mission is advocacy, collaboration, and education. So for the first 4 years or so, we're in year 7, for the first 5 years we did outreach. We opened our doors on Sunday afternoon. People would walk by and they'd come up and they'd see the frogs in the frog pond I built and get excited about having one in their own backyard. And
well, that's a big advocacy effort for you, right? Like having
yes.
what Tell us why. What makes backyard frog ponds beneficial?
Well, mosquito-free is one of the best things, and as Rob mentioned, they're part of the food chain. They're just very peaceful. Families with these raucous kids will come and sit by the frog pond and get very quiet watching the frogs. They're so delightful. And at one time, it's a small pond. We had 13 frogs in this one little space. So they're fun to watch, and then they generate a lot of questions, which we try to answer. We have events, 4 events every year. The Froggy Family Birthday Party, the Save the Frogs Day that is part of Save the Frogs worldwide initiative. And Rob actually was with us for the very first one when he was still mayor, and he had me hanging banners all over the village. So maybe we can put them up again this year.
Sure. I mean, why not? Rob, every conservation project has its challenges. What were some of the biggest obstacles in restoring these ponds, and how did the team overcome them?
Well, one of the biggest challenges we've had in the Arboretum is the removal of invasive species, and one of the most problematic ones and rapid spreading ones we have in this area is Japanese knotweed, which is a shrub. And so one of the vernal ponds will actually be located in an area of Japanese knotweed that has been mitigated. The other problem has been politics and governmental leadership. We've had to really do a lot of outreach and education to explain to people why we're doing what we're doing, why it makes sense. And so the Friends of the organization is a 100-member grassroots organization I founded in Pittsford to kind of steward this project along. And we've probably spent as much time doing research and outreach as we have had doing actual physical labor, volunteer work in the Arboretum.
What partnerships would you say, like local governments, conservation groups, or schools, have been key to making this project successful?
Well, and our biggest partner, obviously, is the Village of Pittsford. The Department of Public Works has done essential maintenance on native trees that were planted in 2021. But beyond that, we've reached out to the Scouts. Next week, Margot and I will be talking to the Seneca Waterways Council to get volunteer efforts from Scouts that want an Eagle Badge. We've had 3 Scout projects completed already. Margot is working with the Pittsford Garden Club on a permaculture garden project that will be a demonstration for the public to see how to cultivate native plants, and that will be located right in the middle of the Arboretum. We also have been talking to wildlife and plant experts in the area as we do our research. We've got a contact at the Pittsford Central School District, and we're just beginning that partnership. We also have made contact with Patrick Garrick, who's the director of the Environmental Sustainability Program at Nazareth University, and they have confirmed that they would like to do a partnership with us to help both further their program and actually maybe help us with some volunteer labor.
Oh, well, that's all very promising. Margot, habitat connectivity. I want to ask you a question about that because I know it's a major issue for wildlife conservation. So how does ensuring that frogs have access to multiple wetland sites improve their chances of survival?
Well, especially the vernal ponds, because they breed there. And if there are fish or bullfrogs in the ponds, then they will be eaten before they develop. So bullfrogs have 2 years of development, and therefore they can't survive in vernal ponds. So in terms of connectivity, frogs can travel quite a long way, and they're like highways. If you build one, they'll come. You don't need to, in fact, it's not allowed to transport frogs from one place to another in New York State. There are rules against that. So as I said, we just had this little body of water, and there they came hopping over. They smell it apparently. Maybe Dr. Robert can tell us more about that, but they do smell water from large distances, and then they call from there and attract their mates. And I don't know that I have not seen any tadpoles yet, although I built them a nursery.
Okay.
So I'm sure in the vernal ponds we'll see lots of tadpoles. In fact, in the town part of where the four ponds that were built by Walsh Scientific, there are wetlands near there, and there are lots of frogs. They don't go into the pools, of course, but they do breed down there in those wetlands.
Well, I am curious about the distinct vocalizations as well as this sense of smell. So, Dr. Robert, let's turn to you. Tell us a little bit more about how the distinct vocalizations play an important role in their survival, and also they're smelling the water?
Well, again, I think the complication is there's many different species of frogs, and it would be different. So I know, for example, for the African frogs, that the vocalization in the water is very important. There's sexual call, there's dominant call from females, and basically there's some kind of agreement for migration. So when they think that the spawn is too small, there's a cohesion for moving in Africa. They could go from one pond to another during the night. For green frogs, I think there's also a lot of vocalization, of course, sexual vocalization. I think in some those species, they will able to detect chemical in water. It would be either nasal or just the skin. Again, the skin is very sensitive and have a lot of potential for detecting not only smell, but like electromagnetic field and things like that. Yeah.
Things we could never do.
Yeah.
Could we, Rob?
Yeah.
Did you want to weigh in on the habitat connectivity?
Yeah, I had just one other comment. One of the great opportunities at the site of the Arboretum and the Erie Canal Nature Preserve next door is it encompasses a broad variety of microecosystems, including several creeks with riparian corridors, the ponds that Margot mentioned. And because the whole goal of the Arboretum is to basically plant a native forest, we'll have right in that 35-acre envelope different microecosystems that will support every stage of a frog's life.
Wow. We have an email from David in Ovid, and you could tell me which one of you want to answer this. I used to enjoy the high-pitched call of spring peepers in vernal ponds in early spring. In the last few years, it seems to me that I hear less of them. I thought this was truly a symptom of silent spring. I thought they had declined, but I read online that that's not the case. What is the state of our vernal singers, the spring peepers? Who wants to take that? Margot, do you know? We don't.
I would go with his first theory,
Yeah.
and I don't know where he read that it's not the case, but he can do something to bring them back.
What is that?
Well, he can build backyard ponds. He can clear invasive plants from the property. He can advocate for clean water. I have a friend who volunteers at a frog house who's very concerned about salt in the winter and how that affects the waterways. There are so many ways, David, you can get involved. You can just start anywhere with the Friends of the Arboretum or a frog house or Save the Frogs or your local DEC. They're just follow your heart and honor those spring peepers because they're so lovely.
The other thing I would add is that the prevalence of peepers, there's a variety of factors that affect them, and one of the big ones is the weather. And I live near a pond where they are very strong. They were extremely loud in 2024. But if we get a late frost, there's a variety of factors that can affect their life cycle. It often, based on my own observation, they seem to go in cycles like many things do in the natural world.
Like trees, as you explained to me, Rob.
Yeah, well, and what was it you just said? The prevalence of peepers? Margot, there's your next book title, The Prevalence of Peepers. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll discuss the ecological impact of frog populations and how climate change is accelerating their decline and what local policies could make a difference. So stay with us. There's more environmental connections after this.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from the Highlands at Pittsford, an independent and assisted living community affiliated with the University of Rochester, offering cottage and apartment homes, daily life enrichment activities, and care assistance as needed. More at highlandsatpittsford.org.
If you're just tuning in, I'm Jasmine Singer, and we're talking about amphibian conservation in Rochester today here on Environmental Connections. I almost said environmental conservation because that is partly what we're talking about today. We're here with Dr. Jacques Robert, with Dr. Margot Fass, and with Robert Corby. Dr. Robert, I want to chat with you for just a moment. Before the break, we talked about disease threats to amphibians. But beyond disease, what role does climate change play in their decline?
Well, first, those animals are cold-blooded vertebrates, so they are of course, sensitive to change in temperature. And, it has fluctuation of temperature that could favorize some pathogens, and also that can change their migration or just their development. And we don't know for sure, what to expect with that, because it also change, acidity of the water, it's temperature dependent. So just by changing the temperature, we change all other physical aspect of water. And it looks that, it's certainly factor that impact negatively frogs.
Are some frog species proving to be more resilient than others? And what sets them apart?
Yeah, so we don't know for sure. I mean, like some frogs, like bullfrog, who is an invasive frog, appear in addition to be resistant to virus, to chytrid, and some other species are like that. And related to that, I wanted to mention before is that, international trade is a problem because people like to collect amphibians from different parts of the world. And, first, they're sometimes not happy with that, and they release that in nature, and they become invasive species. But also those species come with pathogens. So there's regulation now international to declare whether they're infection or not, but nobody really check for this, and that's a big additional risk.
Yeah, that makes me pretty unhappy to hear about the international trade. Does anyone know if there are any efforts underway to kind of fight against this?
Save the Frogs has been very active in trying to stop the importation and exportation of frogs. I want to mention a large factor in the importation also is eating frog legs. And I went down to a Charlie's Frog Pond and I said, I wanted to put up a poster. And I said, do you serve frog legs? And he said, yes, have a seat. I said, no, thank you. And I haven't created a march yet, but Save the Frogs, Gary Creeker was able to get Wegmans to stop selling frog legs. That's a huge cause of the decimation of the frog population.
Wow. Well, I'm a longtime vegan, so I understand.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, really? Okay, so I understand.
Anything with eyes. No.
Right, or with a mother. Dr. Fass, sticking with you for a moment, seasonal shifts are becoming more and more unpredictable. I mean, gosh, this winter alone. How does that affect the breeding and migration patterns of amphibians in our region?
Well, as Dr. Robert was talking, I was thinking about some frogs that migrate further and further, either north or to the top of a mountain with climate change. And, of course, when they get to the very top of the mountain, if it's too hot, then they die. So, and that happens. It's happened in Malaysia, well, all over the world, really, where there are mountain frogs. And that's what I want to say right now.
If you want to join the conversation, if you're also listening to this or watching on YouTube and you're passionate about frogs, give us a call, 844-295-TALK. That's 844-295-8255. You can also leave us a comment. We are streaming right now on YouTube. We do have, yes, Rob.
I just had one other comment on that. Here's an example of how climate change would affect amphibians. We don't really notice this because it happens under the ice, but salamanders begin breeding right now. right now in vernal ponds under the ice. And one of the reasons they've developed to do that is because they're safe from predators down there. When you have a thaw like we're having right now, or a year like last year when that ice doesn't form, then in their breeding season, they are susceptible to predators. So that's just one example of things that are changing pretty radically.
And Rob, the Pittsford Project is part of a broader conservation effort. So how does that fit into the larger picture of land preservation in Monroe County?
Well, Pittsford has a long history of, even though it's a suburban community, of trying to preserve its agricultural lands, which they had a big program, which I was a part of in the 1990s, to save all the family farms that remain. But there's been a renewed emphasis on understanding wildlife corridors and not only saving parcels that haven't been developed, but actually cultivating and preserving corridors so wildlife can actually move from one parcel to the next. And with the Arboretum and Erie Canal Preserve, we're part of the headwaters of Allen Creek, a tributary to Allen Creek. And one of the focuses of the development of our micro-ecosystem is to also look at the health of that riparian corridor and make sure that deer, turkey, fox, and other things can actually safely access some of the other preserved areas in the north half of the town of Pittsford.
I love that. We're going to go to a caller, Hal from southern Livingston County. Thanks so much for calling Environmental Connections.
Hi. Yes, thank you very much. We have a small farm that we've used organic practices and been concerned about conservation. And so we have a series when it's a very wet season of vernal pools that kind of spill into each other as at 1,700 feet, the glaciers cleared off a lot of the topsoil. So there's clay beds. And these form choruses of peepers in the spring that are very loud and plentiful, with hundreds at the very least. And then we also have a more permanent so-called farm pond that's about 10 feet deep with it's over 110 years old. And it has presumably thousands or more frogs breeding in it, and probably under the ice at this time of the year. They're beginning to get things together. And and then they spread everywhere. So that is, they leave the pond and become toady lake frogs. So could you talk about the life cycle and ecology of peepers who like vernal pools, apparently? And maybe describe the species. I have 2 frog books here, but I don't pretend to know much about them.
Why use frog books when you could call Environmental Connections? Thank you, Hal. That's a great question. Dr. Fast, Dr. Robert, Rob, do any of you want to talk a little bit about the natural predators for peepers and pond frogs, which I believe was part of Hal's question? It's a good question.
Well, I'd like to respond to how proud I am of Hal for keeping these ponds, and it brings up one of the benefits of vernal ponds that unless they're drained, as they have drained 90% of them in California and almost 50% of them around the United States, and this all started back in the agricultural era where they needed to develop farmland. A vernal pond, the 3 that we're going to put in, hopefully will last 2,000 years.
Wow.
So I'm very excited about this project because if a meteor kills me and everyone else, still our frogs will survive.
I feel like that about rewilding projects in general. Like I just feel like, okay, well, I have no idea what happens next, but I do know that this is a real investment in the future. Dr. Robert, what are the cascading effects on ecosystems when frog populations decline? Like, could we be facing an ecological domino effect?
Yeah. So again, I don't know. I think scientific now we have this concept of One Health. That means there's an integration between environments, natural life, and human health. And there's a lot of investigation showing that there's clear link between those different aspects. So we are interdependent. So frogs, because of the sensitivity, are indicators of something going wrong in the environments, and ultimately that will affect human through other animals or through directly effect on human. And we work a lot on microplastic right now, and we have shown already that even at low level plastic affect resistance of amphibians against virus pathogens. And so that raised the question in human because they are very closely related in their immune system.
And are there lessons we can learn from past amphibian extinctions that might help protect species today?
Well, what's complicated, over the years, over the million of years, of course, an extinction of species is part of the evolution process. This is a selection, new species appear, some disappear. It's just the rate of disappearance that is big. And again, because of that, it raised the question of, the whole environment is sick, basically, and that means ultimately we'll have a problem for water quality and survival for human. Beside that, I think it's become complicated to details the effect. There's still a lot of investigation right now, but it's complicated. Yeah.
Yes, Margot.
And one of the benefits of vernal ponds is that they do filter water, so they do help with pollution. The more the merrier.
Well, let's stick with that topic of pollution. How does chemical runoff and microplastic contamination impact frog populations? And are these threats worsening, Dr. Fass?
Absolutely, they're worsening, and absolutely they kill frogs. One spray of Roundup will kill a frog within a half hour. And as Dr. Robert was talking before the program started, we all go by farms where they're spewing out chemicals like crazy people. I'm a psychiatrist. So I can say that.
Well, that's upsetting to hear, but are there specific policy changes? And perhaps, Rob, you want to weigh in on this as well. Are there specific policy changes that you'd like to see at the local or state level to better protect wetland ecosystems?
Well, I think as mayor, one of the things that we did is we curtailed the use of pesticides by our Department of Public Works. And I think although the village doesn't have much regulatory control at the upper levels of government, what we hope to do through the Arboretum is educate people about the importance of not using pesticides in your yard because of the detrimental effect they have on birds, insects, and everything else, and actually show them what you should be planting. So the permaculture project, the vernal ponds, and the cultivation of the native trees and shrubs that we're shepherding are all part of that mission.
Are there existing environmental laws that help or maybe hinder frog conservation efforts?
I don't think there's a lot because I think it hasn't been on most people's radar. And, I think one of our mission for all three of us here at the table is to make people aware that this is something we need to tackle and we need to do it urgently.
Yes, Margot.
New York State has banned the use of glyphosate, I think. Roundup, I'm not sure, but I recall 4 or 5 years ago. But there's an organization here in Rochester called Healthy Gardens of Monroe, and Megan, her last name begins with an M.
Okay.
And Mary Moore have been very active. I met Mary when we first opened a frog house, and she's a mover and a shaker, and she knows all the chemicals and all the places and all the places they're used, and has been very active in the town of Pittsford, particularly in trying to get people to be more aware. They have chemical-free gardens. Also, the Cornell extension program, I was able to earn a pollinator-friendly garden
Oh.
sign and a chemical-free garden sign. So
I'm always jealous when I pass by those. I want to do that too.
yes, well, you can do it too. It's really pretty simple, but that's a very active organization, and I wish I could be more associated with them, but you can only do so much.
That's true. Yes, Dr. Robert, what did you want to add?
I wanted to just mention, that at the University of Rochester, the Department of Environmental Medicine has a long-lasting contact with the city of Rochester, and with regard with plastic, we have at least we started to have a contact with several people that water consumption in Rochester to try to get. They are very interested by first getting information, what is known, what is not known, because before to do anything, we need to have a better idea of what action we want to do concerning to a specific type of plastic, for example. So I think we just need a dialogue rather than just fighting there.
A dialogue. Tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what role does citizen science play in monitoring amphibian populations? How can people get involved?
I think, again, I think it's coming also from us, is trying to find, way of meeting either people in the city or, events where we can communicate better. And we started, again, we have like flyers now that have been trying to translate the science, the dry science, to something that could be useful to people to understand, and then get questions from them, because again, it has to be a dialogue. It's not just a one side of demonstration kind of things. Yeah.
Well, and I have to say, when I was mentioning this show that we were planning to a few people, every single person lit up. Like, everyone wants to talk about this. So it is curious, like, why aren't more people talking about it? Bonnie from Rochester, welcome to Environmental Connections. I think you have a comment. Bonnie, are you there?
Is that me?
Yeah, are you Bonnie?
No, I'm Ruth.
Oh, okay, Ruth. Sorry about that. Ruth, I
No
know
worries.
that you want to know more about toads, I believe. Let's ask, what's your question for our panel here?
Yeah, so I actually also run an organic farm in Victor, and we do have a lot of vernal pools in our sections of woods. I try and keep sort of healthy swamps and woods all around my farm because it helps with biodiversity, which helps with organic farming. And we have a lot of vernal pools in our woods because we used to raise pastured pork in the woods, and they sort of created some for us. But I was wondering about American toads, whether they also breed in vernal pools, because those are great to have around. And I do have a lot of them, but anything I can do to sort of help their population, I'd love to do.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a great question. Who wants to take that? We want to talk about toads. Dr. Robert?
What I know is toads, although they are, more terrestrial than amphibians than typical frogs, will have to get water for reproduction and get their tadpoles growing. So they need to be in water.
Okay.
And I know in general toad, it's a very interesting system where the father for a long while guard the tadpoles. So there's a father way of involved, which is, we don't think about that for amphibians. Yeah,
that's a really good point. Yeah. Now let me try to get to Bonnie. Bonnie, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, sorry about that. Just a moment ago.
Yeah, I can actually answer. I can also tell you about the toads.
Oh, wonderful.
So I can answer that question.
Okay.
Because toads will breed they will breed in water-left entire tracts. And that's a really tough thing because the tadpoles won't develop. Actually, the water doesn't last long enough. So vernal pools are very important to toads because they will last long enough for toads to breed in them. As I said, they will just breed in any kind of water. But the other comment I wanted to make, and that includes frogs and toads, is that if we did not have frogs and toads, mosquito populations and other insects that eat crops would be rampant. Toads and frogs eat thousands of mosquitoes and other insects that are harmful to agriculture. So I just wanted to make sure that we appreciated these amphibians for this other simple thing that often gets overlooked.
Oh, thank you, Bonnie. You are incredibly helpful. I'm kind of glad you came on second, even though it was my mistake. Let's go back to talking about community involvement. Rob, I want to turn to you. How can residents get involved in local conservation efforts? Are there any volunteer opportunities or any advice you might have to someone listening to this?
Well, certainly, we can encourage people in our community to join organizations like Friends of the Arboretum, which provides opportunities to do volunteer effort and actually to do outreach also. And, I can speak to Pittsford, but every community has organizations like us. And I think the more that we can all be number one, informed system. We don't teach people what kind of trees grow in Western New York. What's their life cycle? What are the secondary trees that pioneer the fields and start to take over? What are our native plants? What conditions do they need? And so I think moving all of those issues along are something that we can do at a very local level, and that's actually what we're trying to do at sort of a micro level with the Arboretum and the Vernal Pond Project here in Pittsford.
And I can imagine that children are fascinated by frogs. Margot, is there a role for children in these efforts?
Oh, absolutely. And we're lucky to have Mr. Tom Biebighauser coming. He's a wetland expert. He's probably been building wetlands and ponds for over 35 years. He'll be here on April 25th, 26th, and 27th. And he actually hopes to get started on Thursday, the 24th. But he says that when children get a chance to walk around in the mud with their boots on and see the frogs and tadpoles and everything up close, that there's a lot of scientific evidence that their math and science scores improve, that they're happier, and in general. And there's another group here in Rochester called Rochester Ecology Partners with Chris Widmeyer, and I met one of the teachers who is over at School 12, I think, the Frederick Douglass School, and they have a nature-based learning program there. And it's so exciting to see that sort of thing happening, and in the city, no less, which is the most important thing. That is one thing a frog house would like to do more of, is to have more children and classes come out from the city. And I have sometimes gone into the city with the book and a little PowerPoints and so forth. But there was once someone running on integrating the city and suburbs as the county legislator, and that person didn't win. Oh. And so they're still terribly separated. It would be nice if we could share more resources with the city.
Well, and
vice versa.
Rob, many communities struggle to balance conservation with development. What are some practical ways that towns and cities can ensure that these priorities coexist?
Well, that's a great topic, because I think Margot and I were just talking a few minutes before this program about the economic and livability benefits of conserving land. And, if you look at the real estate around Minute Ponds Park, it's very expensive real estate because everybody wants to live where you have access to the natural environment. And so the remedy isn't Minute Ponds Park, but it's creating more spaces like that in all of our communities so everybody has access to it. And, we're fortunate here in the city of Rochester to have the Olmsted Park system that in almost every quadrant of the city, you have walkable access to a major area of open space and a natural setting. And I think, that needs to be part of our planning process. There's been a lot of talk over the last few decades about walkable planning, but especially because of what we learned in the COVID experience, we need to integrate walkable access to wild open space as something that we all need for our physical and mental health.
And are there funding sources that municipalities can tap into for wetland restoration projects?
There are, and they tend to run in cycles. But if you check the New York State Department of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, there are usually programs available for a variety of environmental purposes through that agency.
As we start to close up, Dr. Robert, I want to turn to you. Looking ahead, what is the most urgent action that is needed to protect Rochester's frogs?
Well, again, infectious disease is certainly a big brain. So when we talk about chytrid, there's another chytrid that infect more salamanders. So far, it has not been detected in U.S., in America, actually. And there's been a task force that has been prepared here because unfortunately, we think that it will come sooner or later. And what we will do, because, for example, the Smoky Mountains are an area where there's the higher diversity of salamanders. If this fungus come there, it will wipe out the whole ecosystem. And so there's little we can do in terms of treatments. It's more like prevention. But again, we come to the trades. That's a big thing. And the other part is, habitat destruction. I think the other side is trying to beef up place for amphibian.
Margot.
Yes, the double-edged sword. When Rob was talking about we need the green space, and then lots of people will go there and live there, and then they will pollute that area. So it's a balance that we hope the environmentalists will win, and that homeowners themselves will help to preserve the very land that they value. The other thing is that I read that if you put frogs with chytrid in a sauna bath or sauna, that this will mitigate the disease. Huh. So even you could put cinder blocks and stack them up around your property, and makes little homes and would possibly increase their immune system.
Well, I think that's a very positive note that we can end on. I know that there's so much more we could discuss around these issues, but unfortunately, that's all for today's episode of Environmental Connections. I want to thank my guests, Dr. Jacques Robert, Dr. Margot Fass, and Robert Corby for their invaluable insights. Frogs, there's just a lot more to discuss, and as you were saying, Dr. Robert, let's keep discussing it, keep thinking about it. We get involved today, right in your own backyards. From WXXI News, I'm Jasmine Singer. Thanks for making today's Environmental Connections.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.